Hello and welcome to this episode of Our Sabbatical Story. My name is Rachel and I'm here with my husband Luke.
Pleased to be here. Thank you for that warm welcome.
Very warm. We are pastors and leaders who have taken our first sabbatical this year, and so we just thought we would record a few episodes about that experience. And we are up to episode 3. And so we're just going to dive straight in. You can catch up on the earlier 2 episodes where we talked about why we took a sabbatical and why we took it now and how we structured our time. In the last episode, we talked about the first couple of weeks of our family holiday and what we did and what we felt like God was saying to us during that time. But I think for me, week 3 is where it really started to feel like a sabbatical experience.
Yep. Absolutely. It was a long time away from normal routine and it started to feel a little bit unusual, didn't it?
And so when we began planning the sabbatical, we thought that in this week we would do something like kind of my dream was to go somewhere we'd never been before.
Yeah.
It was still school holidays for our kids. And so I'll just tell everybody that my big grand plan was to do a big road trip. And in typical me fashion, I'd planned and proposed this a number of different ways and put it to you as a pitch. But it essentially included, visiting some friends on our road trip in Victoria and then driving along the Great Ocean Road, which we've never done before, getting to the Barossa Valley, which again we've never been to before, having lunch at Maggie B's Farm Shop Cafe, which we'll get to why that was kind of the focal point of our trip, and then driving back along the top of New South Wales or in a straight line back, because I love a road trip. I wanted to go somewhere we'd never been.
But when we crunched the numbers, it was a lot of driving. It was a long time sitting in a car for a couple of days, 3 days in the Barossa.
Yeah.
So I wasn't a big fan of the pitch, and I think
even though I gave it to you in multiple iterations.
Yeah, and then I kind of got on board with it, then we got off board with it, and then we decided just to fly down. We got some cheap flights, and that sealed the deal.
Yeah, so long story short, we decided to fly to the Barossa, and let's just explain to people who might be listening to this why the Barossa and why Maggie B originally. Why did we want to go to Maggie B's place?
Yeah, well, let's start with the Barossa. I mean, we live in a wine region in Australia, the Hunter Valley. It's one of the, it is at last stats, the most visited wine region in Australia. And we live here, so it's lovely. We get to enjoy the cellar doors and the tourist stuff that is around on our doorstep. And
we feel like representatives of our region.
Yeah, but we haven't really explored any other wine regions in Australia.
Yeah.
So we have no idea whether this is great or not or what other wine regions are like. So we just felt like it would be nice to visit another well-known wine region in Australia. That's one of the reasons why we thought we'd travel to the Barossa. But in addition to that, we also have I reckon lots of Aussies would have this kind of warm affinity to Maggie B because of her place in the Australian food scene, and we're I wouldn't say that we're foodies, but we've always loved cooking and we love watching the cooking TV shows. And as a kid, I used to watch even the Bush Tucker Man, that's going on way back.
Well, I watched it too.
Yeah,
before I even knew you.
And all that kind of TV food show, I loved all that. And then so the Cook and the Chef on the ABC. We really loved to watch that. And then we got our kids watching that. I used to watch it when I used to babysit our eldest daughter when you used to be at our local council chambers.
Feminist alert.
That's right.
Referring to minding your own child as babysitting.
Yeah, sorry. No, I probably would have said that you would babysit also when I was doing my stuff. But anyway, Zara and I would watch that. So, we would... And then we had all the kids watching it. So, long story short...
So, I mean, I have to put it down into recorded history, the real, my perspective of this family nostalgia thing, I'll say, about Maggie B. Because you're right, that show, The Cook and the Chef, started, I think, on the ABC. It would have been in the mid 2000s. I mean, I could be making that up, but that's my memory because
That's when you came across it, at least the first time.
Yeah, but I think it was like live back in those days.
Yeah.
Like you were watching them each week live when our eldest was a little kid, and I was out on a Wednesday night doing what I was doing, and so you would watch it with her, and you had like it was just a cute little father-daughter thing, and then. I think after that, the next phase of it was I bought you the DVD box set.
Oh, what a great day that was. Was that a Christmas present?
Probably. Like the whole... And like my
whole
memory
box
of
set.
it is that it was a really thick box set.
Oh,
like
yeah,
it was
back
like
in the olden days.
6 discs
Yeah.
in like each in their own case.
Wow.
In a cardboard
Yep.
sleeve.
Yeah. Took up a whole shelf on the bookshelf just
Yep.
for the one
Yes, that's
series.
right.
Yeah.
And so at some stage we rewatched them all through again from start to finish
Yep.
in our old house.
Yep.
Now, when we moved to our current house, we made the big call,
To get rid of
every DVD.
DVDs.
No more DVDs.
Gone.
No more DVD player.
Nope,
We were
gone.
like, we're embracing the future.
Yep.
It's streaming
It
from here
streams
on in.
or it doesn't hit our screens.
Yeah. So that was 5 years ago that we moved into our current house. And then the last little piece of the puzzle that I think made me feel really nostalgic about wanting to go and see Maggie Beer's place.
Because Maggie Beer's Place is where they filmed. It's the set for the Cook and the Chef
That's
TV
right.
show.
That's right, yeah. That's probably a crucial piece of information to include. Was that during COVID, I just feel like I'm getting teary again thinking about it now. All of that time spent as a family, we discovered the Cook and the Chef again on SBS On Demand,
yeah,
the food channel, which is a great channel, by the way, if you love food shows. And so we used to be there stuck at home, not able to go anywhere, and we forced our kids
Yep.
to watch
it.
through them again.
Yep.
And so I just have like these warm family bonding memories of watching the Cook and the
Maggie
Chef
Beer
together.
and Simon. Oh, what's his last name?
Oh, no.
Maggie Beer
I
and
was going to say Simon Cowell, the wrong person.
anyway,
Simon
Simon
It's
and
not-
Maggie.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel really bad, Simon, if you ever listen to this.
Let's
We
Google
really appreciate you, respect your ability as a chef.
Anyway, so yes,
So that was in my little heart. Why the Barossa? Why now? Because we've got the time on the sabbatical. Made the call to fly, not drive. But I just wanted, I reread my journal about this week, and it reminded me that I was feeling a bit upset I was feeling quite upset actually before we left. I was anxious about leaving the kids.
yeah, because there's a whole other backstory there about that plan not playing out the way that we'd set it up
Planned,
before
yeah.
the sabbatical.
So all of a sudden, at the last minute, it looked like we were
that's
like,
causing dramas and
Yeah. So,
tension.
but that ended up being a blessing that we flew because it was a shorter period of time away from home.
Yeah,
But I was also just not feeling great in my body. I was having insomnia. I was feeling anxious. And I've written in my journal that I was feeling really angry with God because this was such a long awaited and highly anticipated trip. And I just felt like I'd lost all the joy and excitement of anticipating like the fulfillment of a dream, going somewhere I've never been before. And, it feels like a silly little dream to describe to other people, but to us it meant a lot, or to me it meant a lot. And I only share that because our experience, once we kind of hit the ground in the Barossa, ended up being completely different than what we imagined and what we planned. And I would now say, like as we start to unpack the stories and what happened, that with hindsight, it became, well, even within the few days that we were there, it became the beginning of really sensing like God was speaking to us and ordering our steps, because it was turning out so differently than what we'd planned. And we just began to see God in new ways and seeing him speaking to us.
yeah, and it speaks to the power of being in a completely foreign environment and a first-time experience. And part of the sabbatical learning is that you want to be intentional about putting yourself in environments that are new, so that you can it just broadens your perspective and allows your mind to think about things in a very different way. And so the Barossa was different, yes, but it was also different to what we expected as well. So yes, we experienced things that we didn't think we would experience internally, personally, spiritually. However, the actual, the Barossa itself was just nothing like I thought it would be in terms of the economics, the industry, the aesthetic, the architecture, the community. So everything about it was completely unexpected from my point of view. I hadn't done a deep dive on the Barossa to know, but what I had perceived was completely thrown out the window. And I think what that allowed God to do was to just step into that new place in my thinking and my heart and say, well, how can you see me at work in this place? And then the story of the Barossa and its the founding of that community and how it came about was all about this idea of these.
Well, before you go into that, what if we just kind of. Because that was probably kind of...
it was unexpected.
Yeah, and it was a couple of days... Well, it was the second day in, I think. It was we went to a place for a wine tasting because here we are in this wine region and just randomly have this conversation with this cellar door salesperson about how the Barossa was settled. But before we kind of maybe go specifically to that, or maybe this is your answer to the question I'm going to ask you... just sitting here right now, what would be your top two takeaways? Or what would be the top two things that you think of when you reflect back to that week in the Barossa? Either an experience or, an unexpected thing or something that God showed you or said to you or... And then you could ask me.
I will ask you. Okay, let me go first.
I'm being very generous. I'm letting you go first.
Let me answer that question. Yeah, I mean, because it did have such a profound impact, there were lots of different moments across that 4 days that were just they're memorable, and I'm still thinking about them today.
Yeah. All
these weeks later. So I'll just pick a couple that come to mind, and one of them was when we were driving. You like to travel. You like to go to places you've never been before.
Correct.
And so we were going along. You'd mapped out to go to a certain lookout.
This is on the final day when we're leaving.
That's right. So I mean,
and I'm insisting that I get to have my road trip that I never got.
Yeah.
So we're in the hire car, and I plan out just on Google Maps a few little places to visit in a loop to get us back to the airport at
And I was really this is just a drive around nowhere. What are we doing? We've kind of done all of the things we need to do and seen all the things we need to see. But just go back a step before I tell that story. Even the things that you would expect to be familiar with, so going and doing a wine tasting or going and visiting a museum, even in those very familiar kind of experiences, I was struck just by how clearly I was hearing God just speak to me or stir my spirit about my faith and my faith life and my passion and my desires and our future. Even going to that wine, we went to a wine tasting in this old horse stable that had been converted into a cellar door, and hearing that the 12 children or 16 children, I think 11 children were sleeping in the rafters, and that was the home. They were sleeping with the horses in the ceiling. The wine, I can't even remember the wine, but I can remember the memory of or thinking back to the pioneering spirit of these people who were religious refugees, and they were Germans who were coming to South Australia looking for safe haven. And
because they were being persecuted for their faith.
That's right, for their faith. And just getting on with it and building something from nothing. So even that cellar door experience, wow, that was powerful. So all those kind of familiar things were very surprising. So fast forward to the last day. So this is just to answer your question, one of the things that really stood out, which I might be stealing one of your stories.
Probably.
But as on the road to nowhere that you wanted to travel to, we just took an unexpected detour like a spontaneous detour. Oh, here's a left-hand turn, let's just drive in there. We've driven into this thing. It's another kind of lookout that we've just stumbled across, and it's got like a monument which kind of points to all the different places in the Barossa, like, that's where Adelaide is, that's the Adelaide Hills, that's Barossa, and you're kind of looking out over the township. And then back a little from there, you've got like a memorial or a monument. And so on that monument, it had written Joshua 2:9, the Lord has given us this land. It was called the Barossa Pioneer Memorial. And written on that memorial was, in the early 1840s, the Barossa was settled by scattered British families. They were followed from 1842 onwards by large groups of Germans who had fled from their homeland to escape religious persecution. The first settlers were engaged in agricultural pursuits, but soon they turned to grape and fruit growing, for which the Barossa has become renowned. The life of the pious pioneers was centred around the family and the church. They sought first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, trusting that God would provide their everyday needs. Thanks be to God. So this is on a huge stone monument.
Yeah, on a high point.
7 feet tall, on the highest point, looking
At a
out
public
over the
lookout.
Barossa, public lookout. And it's just this bold statement of the provision of God for the people of God. And we were, in the sabbatical for us, we were going into it. We wanted to hear from God and find in that, in a renewed relationship with God, in the, like, a deepening of our experience with him, some, a renewed confidence in his provision for us as a family and our next season of, productivity. And so to be in that place, and I got kind of a little bit emotional and a bit teary at that lookout, because I just felt so clearly God was just speaking that over us and our family and our church and our next season, that we want to be the kind of pioneers that are family and church first. And we want to be the kind of people that seek the kingdom of God first and trust God with our everyday needs. And there it was, just etched in stone, somewhere where we never thought we would be, off a side road we never thought we would drive down, in a moment that we never thought we'd experience. And that was kind of like what the whole experience was like in the Barossa, just almost hour after hour.
Yeah.
It was quite amazing.
Yeah.
So that's one of my stories. That'll do. That's enough.
No, I think you should tell us the other one.
Well, it's similar. It's when we finally got to the top of the final part of that road trip to the end destination, which was a little mound on the top of the Adelaide Hills, another lookout.
I don't think that was the final destination, but don't let the facts get in the way.
Wasn't that where you wanted to go? Wasn't that the final lookout?
That was before we went to Harndorf.
Oh, Harndorf, that's later. Yeah, but I'm talking like in terms of the roads that we hadn't travelled down before. We went to that. There wasn't another lookout after that, was there? Was that the final lookout? I think that was it. And we got to this another lookout. It was even higher again, and it was a little lookout that was in the Adelaide Hills. And again, it was this community constructed.
It was at Eden Hills.
Oh, sorry, Eden Hills. Yeah, like this community structured lookout. And around the lookout had these little plaques that the community had put in place. And again, it was talking about, the provision of God, the blessing of God. And we've discovered by reading those plaques that the community would gather there every Easter and have good Easter Sunday sunrise at this particular lookout. And on this lookout is this enormous cross that had been erected. And again, just kind of like overlooking the entire Eden Valley. And that, again, I was just so struck by the way that this community have put God first in, not I guess in all areas in terms of their, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but they were willing to do whatever it took to remind themselves and their community that God was central to their way of life. So I thought that was quite profound.
Those would be probably two of my highlights too, but I've got others which I can share. But it was really striking for me to see a public monument in Australia with a Bible verse giving all glory to God for provision. That was just inspirational to feel like we're a part I didn't think that we had that in us as a country. And so to see that there was a community still around in Australia that would hold to those kinds of principles and values as primary. And then when it came to the Eden Valley, the Eden Valley one with the cross, like I was saying before, how I just kind of devised this, loop of a road trip for that final day before we went back to the airport. And when we drove up to that one, I couldn't actually remember why I'd picked it because I'd done the work that morning or whatever, and I just mapped out this route and I'm telling you where we're going. And as we're driving up to it, I'm like, I can't actually remember why we're going here. And Luke's going to get really mad because
it's a road to nowhere.
It's a road to nowhere. There might be nothing up here, and he already isn't really on board with this whole road trip idea. And then when we got up there was this enormous cross, and I was like, and it took me by surprise, even though I was the one that had put it in the schedule. And so like that, God was just surprising us again and again. But by that time, I think by the time we got up there and saw this enormous cross and then read all those plaques that you've referred to about, a community of people who were prepared to still put God first. And I'm sure it's not the whole community, but there were enough of them, and it was an ecumenical thing. It was like people across church denominations choosing to be in unity about erecting something that is public to people that they could come and be at. And there were all these little lambs there. Like I've got a video on my phone of like these little lambs on the hill kind of bleating. And by then, driving up there and seeing the cross and seeing the lambs and this amazing view and reading about the community spirit and unity and people putting God first in their lives, I was almost like, oh, of course. Like like everything about this trip has been like this.
Yeah.
About just coming and being surprised by, just seeing God in nature and in the community and in everything that was happening around us.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. Yeah, there's so much more we could talk about.
Well, you going to ask me or?
I am. I'm looking forward to this question.
You haven't had to ask me any questions yet.
So they're my two big stories. Well, the two that come to mind.
Yeah.
What would you say struck you the most in your time at the Barossa? You could share as many stories as you like. We've got all the time in the world.
You're not going to limit me.
No, you can do 2 stories, 3 stories.
I'm partial to a long story.
Yeah.
Well, those two that you've mentioned were also quite striking for me, but the two that I have written about in my journal, one definitely was going to Maggie Beer's place, and I've written here that I got quite emotional about being there. And
I remember that. I remember you sobbing.
I didn't
Had to pick up off the floor.
Oh, my gosh.
You're in the fetal position.
I got my photo taken in Maggie's kitchen, which was fun, and we'd pre-booked to have lunch at the restaurant on site, which is actually not run by Maggie. There's a cafe in the main kind of building, and then there's this other other restaurant which Maggie's daughter runs. And the thing that struck me about that, one of the things that struck me about that experience, apart from the nostalgia, was that I'm looking around at this place which I recognise
from the SBS Food.
From watching
ABC,
the show.
DVD box set.
And I'm looking around at all the products that I've either seen on my supermarket shelf or in little boutique providore places or at Maggie Beer online when I've looked at hampers and such. So I'm looking at all this produce that's there, all these jars of condiments and jams and chutneys and everything else that she's got there. I'm looking at the cakes in the cabinet, and I'm looking at the staff that are working there in the shop. And then we had the experience of sitting in the restaurant next door, which Maggie's daughter runs, and being served up. It was actually called, I think, the feast menu, now that I think about it.
Oh.
And we were coming into, we were in this time of intentionally celebrating and feasting about the period that had been the past 10 years while dreaming about the next 7 years.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that menu in that restaurant was called the feast. It was a few courses. Anyway, the point is that it was all generous.
Very generous.
It was, and it all felt like I didn't get to meet Maggie as much as we lingered over lunch in the hope that she would drop in and we'd get to say hello. And people had told us that, she comes in most days, so we took as long as we could over lunch. So despite the fact that we didn't actually meet Maggie face to face, the place felt like how I imagined Maggie is and how I've perceived her through many years and times of watching her show. And so as somebody who's, spent the last 6 years studying leadership, and I have a personal leadership philosophy which comes from a book called, I'm going to forget now, there's something of visionary companies.
Is it Jim Collins?
Yeah. What's it called?
Not sure.
That's going to kill me. I'll have to put it in the notes later. Anyway, the saying is about being a leader who's a clock builder rather than a time teller.
Ah, right, yes.
And that's a phrase that I try and keep in my mind because I have a tendency to be a hands-on leader who just gets in and gets everything done myself, or only trusts myself to get things done rather than raising other leaders to do things by the agreed culture. And that was the inspiration I was taking from the Maggie Beer experience, that even though she was not there personally, it felt like her. And I'm looking around at all this produce and I'm thinking Maggie is, I don't know, she's in her 70s, I'm pretty sure, late 70s maybe. I'm sure she's not sitting at home with the wooden spoon in the big stock pot still personally making the jam and the chutney. But it feels like her.
Yeah.
So whatever she's been able to do and however she's been able to lead her business and her company, she's been able to build something that now functions without her being there physically present every moment of every day. And I found that hugely inspirational as a leader. And it really did inspire me about becoming that kind of a leader. So I've written in my journal, this is the kind of leader I'm dreaming about becoming. I want to be able to build clocks which will endure with generational legacy, still carrying uniqueness of vision and culture, but long after I'm directly hands-on leading them. So that was my first one.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a big takeaway.
Yeah.
And probably not what you expected to take away.
Exactly.
Again.
Not at all what I was expecting to take away. And the other one was just about, we've kind of touched on it already, but the unity that I felt from the community in the Barossa Valley and the willingness to be different from other people and communities around them. And so it was just so striking to be in a place where there was no... I don't remember seeing a single franchise.
There was not one chain.
The whole time we were there. And we drove, so the Barossa is a number of kind of smaller townships, I guess, in this one. It's much like Cessnock where we live. There's all these smaller villages and townships.
Yeah.
And so there's all these, as we explored them, all these different townships, you could see that the people there cared enough about the place that they lived in and their values, the way they wanted it to be, that they had somehow kept enough unity to have the power to make decisions about how their township would be developed. And so, to me that spoke of unity. It spoke of collaboration because it's so much harder to do something as a group of people than just to have a leader who's a dictator and tells people this is how it will be done.
That's right.
And we know that because we're in leadership. We know that it's harder to work for unity than to just go in and tell people this is how it needs to be done. And so I found that completely inspirational. And, one example was we went into this furniture shop, and within the furniture shop there was a coffee shop, and I think there was a homewares, like a gifty shop, and a floristry kind of a shop. And they were all separate businesses, but they'd worked together to take out this larger lease of a larger space because they get that when you collaborate, like it's better for everybody's business. And it empowered them to not have to...
have a Westfield there.
Yeah. And so I just found that so inspirational, because unity it's hard fought for, but when you can win it,
God commands a blessing.
Yeah, and it has meant that they've gotten to hold on to a way of life and a set of values that is different from other places. And you know, when I reflected on this in my journaling, the thing that I was taking away from that as well was I just felt like it had been a bit of a theme of God speaking into my own life this year about being okay with being different.
Yeah.
And as the people of God, we have to be okay with being different from the world around us, or we're never going to influence anybody.
Yeah.
And so we have to be unified in that as well. But, you know, as parents leading our kids, we have to be okay. We have to empower our kids to be okay with being different from the other kids, because we belong to a different kingdom. And so I just felt like that was God speaking to me about something, or confirming something He'd already been speaking to me about this year, about being confident enough in who I am and who I'm called to be okay with not being exactly the same as everybody else.
And as we're talking about this, it is becoming more clear to me that, you know, what God was saying to us individually was actually quite different in our experience in the Barossa. And although we obviously we're in the same place at the same time, doing the same things, God was kind of speaking to us about, you know, what He was doing in our life. So that was that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, we might leave it for the Barossa, but before we wrap up this episode,
it's been a good episode, by the way.
Are you saying that to me or to the people who've just been listening to it?
Well, to both of you. To you who is listening or watching, and to you who is hosting this episode.
Well, that's an unexpected compliment.
It's been very good. It's the unexpected episode.
It is, yeah.
We've used that word a lot.
We have. Well,
it's not unexpectedly good, because I would have
me.
expected it to be good because you've hosted it.
Oh, that's a good comeback. Well, speaking of unexpected, that's a good segue, because the last little experience of that week, it's kind of a crossover from week three of the sabbatical to the next.
What did I call week 3 in my little list of names?
Oh, you had a
here?
name for it.
Week 3 was called Rest and Restoration.
I mean, we haven't even touched on the breakfast.
What breakfast? Oh, my goodness, the sausages.
The sausage saga. We can't. That's got to be...
That's a whole episode on its own. Oh, my goodness. But what if someone listens to this who was there? They're never going to listen to it or watch it. They're never going to see it.
Oh, you never know.
No, they're never going to see it.
Anyway, I've had a very funny experience or observation of something that happened.
I couldn't handle that.
Sausages. Luke was raging.
I was infuriated
so
by it.
if you have listened,
still infuriated
this
by
is how we will know if you've listened to this episode or not. If you approach Luke Main and say,
tell me the story.
Tell me about your rage about the sausages.
Wow.
In the Barossa.
Week 2 was called Setting Intentions and Goals.
Right.
Which was the time, that's how we had that big fight. If you missed us talking about the fight, that's in the previous episode. And then week 1 was called, don't know, what did we call week 1?
I didn't call it anything. You're the guy with the
names.
With the titles.
Week 1 was called Celebrating the Past. That was kind of week 2.
Yeah.
Week 1 and 2 were kind of combined into one.
Anyway, thanks for taking us back there and
4,
wrecking my segue.
Week 3.
My segue into unexpected. So we want to finish week 3 with what happened on the Sunday. So we're back from the Barossa. It's typically what we did was we had weekends at home with our kids, and then we did other things during the week. So on our Sundays where we were home, we actually went to church with our friends at Hope UC. Shout out to Hope UC. At their Charm Haven location, because it's not far of a drive from our house. So our kids were going to church at our normal church in Cessnock, the church we lead, and we were going to Hope UC at Charm Haven. And so I just want to mention this experience because I've written here in my journal, we were in uncharted territory, as this Sunday marked the first time ever in our adult lives Luke and I have taken 4 consecutive Sundays away from serving in our Cessnock church.
Now it's starting to feel like an unusual break, isn't it?
That's right. That was a real
pivotal weekend.
Yeah, just to have that awareness that even though we've only been leading our church for 10 years, we've both been, in our church our whole married life and beyond, and you since you were a kid. So literally our whole adult lives, 25 years, we have been in Cessnock serving in some capacity pretty well every week, and the maximum we've ever had away in a row is 3 weeks. So here we are on a fourth Sunday.
4 weeks away.
However, we still love Jesus.
We're still in church.
We're still in church.
Giving it our best.
Because we wanted to keep putting ourselves in places where we would hear from God.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not a churchgoer, well, like Christianity 101 is, if you want to hear God's voice in your life, you get to where God's people are. You be in the gathering.
Be in the room.
So we were in the room in a different church. And on this particular Sunday, the church that we were visiting had somebody speaking who had a prophetic ministry. And like, I might just share about what we experienced, because she prayed for us. Her name was Roma Waterman. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of things that, again, because we went there to hear from God, we heard from God. So one of the things that she said, which we kind of took away for ourselves, was that God had been doing a 10-year reset in our lives. And we both, like, we didn't, we talked about that.
When we got back in the car.
That's
on
right.
the way out. We said that was for us.
That each of us said it to each other and confirmed it. That was for us. I've written, this resonated with both Luke and I, that we thought it was a word for us. We have just celebrated 10 years of one particular ministry role or appointment, but it's more than that. It's been 10 years of refining and transforming our theology in so many ways. Mm-hmm. It's been 10 years of resetting how we do our marriage and parenting relationships. It's been 10 years of resetting what we value and how we see leadership and success. It just felt like confirmation that God has been in that whole process, and that it's okay that it's taken that long, but that we are now ready for what's next. It confirmed other words or promptings we feel like we've had from God over the past few years as well.
Yeah, and the key takeaway, the word, the encouragement she gave to us was a few key things. One thing that she said was that, because she didn't know who we were, obviously, and didn't know what was going on, didn't know that we were on a sabbatical.
She might have known that, I think.
Yeah, she said that she just kept getting these words, rest to run, like you are in a season of rest to run. And the prophecy was about that, among other things. It was also talking about, she spoke a bit about our kids and the anointing or the blessing that would be on them in this next season. But there was something about that whole idea, acknowledging that was a model for our joint ministry post-sabbatical. That the sabbatical rest was something that we were having so that we could run in the next season, but also that was a rhythm. And when you look back at our ministry life, it kind of has been a bit like that, where we've maybe not by choice, like this time we've taken intentional rest to run, but in the past we've kind of gone really hard, and really fast for a period of time, and then either maybe had to, because we've kind of ran out of steam, taken a rest to go again. And so I think this next season will be similar, but we'll be aware of that. And I think that's what God was saying, that could be just our style of leadership, is that we rest well, we celebrate well, we feast well, we restore well, and then we go really hard and we run really fast and we get things done and we move the needle and then we rest. So that's one of the things I took away from that word.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And I've written that down here in my journal too, that this rhythm would mark our ministry, taking periods of good quality rest to be recharged and hear from God, and then being able to go hard again. I loved this, as I felt like it aligned so well with my natural body and mind rhythms. And again, like it was God saying it's okay to be like that, which I really appreciated. And the other reason why I wanted to mention that as we wrap up is that here, you and I are sitting here now in our 4th week post-sabbatical.
Yep.
And we will talk about the detail of it in later episodes, but I feel like that is already our experience. That there's been some things that have happened even at the end of the sabbatical and the beginning of our time back at work, which...
Oh, you don't want to miss those episodes.
No, that's right. Which have meant that we're now running and we feel completely well rested for some of the more other unexpected things that have been happening since we came back to work. Mm-hmm. So that's probably a good point to say, keep tuning in.
I'm looking forward to the next episode. Is the next episode one where you're going to interview me?
It's going to be all about you, baby.
All right. Make sure you... it's going to be a long one then.
Oh, good.
Extra long. So bring your pillow.
Bring your ears.
Bring your ears. Listen to it in segments, 20-minute lots.
That's all you'll be able to handle.
So, I'm looking forward to that. I've got a lot. Like I'm looking forward to that. Obviously.
I know you've got some good stuff.
But then I'm
to
looking
share.
forward to asking you similar questions when we just hear from you about your time away. Because as a spoiler alert, and we may have even mentioned this in our first week, that the structure of the sabbatical was that I took a few days away on my own, and then in the next week Rachel took a few days away on her own, and we're going to reflect on that, what God was doing and saying in our lives. And I've heard some of your stories, and they're good stories.
They are good stories. I've probably got too many for one episode.
I know, we've got
have to whittle them down.
No, people love to hear you talk, Rachel. You're a great storyteller.
So that's it for today. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned in for the next episode of Our Sabbatical Story.